Okay, it's noon right now, and hello everyone. Welcome to the Pandemic in Policy, Practice, and Politics series. My name is Meghna Sabarwal, and I'm a professor and program head of the Public and Nonprofit Management program in the School of Economic Politics and Policy Sciences at UTD. I'm very, very delighted to welcome Ms. Peggy Bailey to today's talk, which is titled Affordable Rental Housing Policy and the Pandemic. Equity begins with where you live and how much it costs. I'll give a brief bio for Ms. Bailey. She has a lot of accolades to her name. So I'll try to be brief so we can really get to the heart of it. Ms. Bailey is the senior advisor on rental assistance in the Office of the Secretary at the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, which we know as HUD. Her responsibilities include improving policy and practices related to the department's rental subsidy and supply programs. This includes the Housing Choice Voucher and public housing programs, which help over 3 million people afford housing. Prior to joining HUD, Peggy was the Vice President of Housing Policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. In this capacity, she oversaw the center's work to protect and expand access to affordable housing for people with low incomes. And prior to that, prior to becoming the Vice President, uh, Ms. Bailey served as the Director of Connect the Dots, Bridging Systems for Better Health. It was an initiative that identifies opportunities to strengthen the link between housing and health policy. So Ms. Bailey has really dedicated most of her life to the issue of homelessness and housing and affordable housing. And prior to joining this center in Jan of 2016, um, Peggy served as Director of Health Systems Integration for the Corporation for Supportive Housing, where she focused on finding sustainable funding sources for the services that people with histories of homelessness and chronic health conditions need to maintain their housing. Peggy's also worked for the National Alliance to End Homelessness and Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs. Peggy holds a BA in Government from the University of Notre Dame, and she's an alumna of EPS. She received her Master of Public Affairs degree from the University of Texas at Dallas in 1997. We are so happy to have you. Welcome back to UTD. Before I start asking you questions, Peggy, I just want to mention this disclaimer because you are a federal employee. So Peggy Bailey is speaking on her own behalf and not as a representative of the federal government. Um, Peggy, warm welcome. I'd like to start off by asking, can you briefly describe this wonderful journey you've had, from graduate school and now all the way to current role as a senior advisor rental assistance at HUD?
No, thank you so much, and hello everybody. It's great to be back at UTD. It's crazy. Thinking back to graduation day in 1997, I did not expect myself to be a political appointee in a future presidential administration, but here I am. I after graduate school, I went to work for the city of Rockwall. Rick Crowley, who was the city manager there until just recently, was the assistant city manager at the time, and a UTD grad, and so had put one of those flyers up in the building to looking for an intern. And that turned into 3 years of working for the city, learning about city government, figuring out that my own personality was that I needed that city being recognized at the Home Depot in Rockwall and someone complaining about their streets was not for me. And I had spent a summer interning for then Governor Ann Richards in Austin, and realized that while working at the state level is fantastic with the biannual budget in the state, things moved a little bit too slow in that off year for me. So in working at the city, I was like, okay, I don't want to work in the state level. The city level is too close to people. I love people, but I want to I need a little distance. So where can I make good things happen and still but maybe be a little bit separated? And so I came to the Beltway, which is way separated from people, but came to DC. I moved here without a job and slept on a friend's couch for 3 months until I did get a job. And my friend was in IT, so I didn't really even know anybody in politics or advocacy work when I came here. I just really, the funny thing was, in deciding to move, I was driving on 635 on a beautiful February day and just had this thought that, you know what, they were about to raise my rent, I think $50. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to leave because this is the time to go. And that was in 1999, and I haven't really looked back since. And so I really, my story is what makes me pinch myself about my story is that I came to DC just to do good work, and I didn't really, play in like a DC game. I didn't have an idea that by 35 I wanted to be chief of staff to the president, like maybe George Stephanopoulos was, or something like that. I just came to DC, wanted to do good work, met, had friends outside of work, but really made sure that I did a good job and met people along the way. That eventually last fall was asked to be a part of the Biden administration's transition team. So through November, we got started a little late for those of you who followed that, but through November and January, from November to January, worked on that. And then as a part of that work, got asked to join the administration at HUD to be the senior advisor on rental assistance. And it's just been a great 155 days of really using this opportunity to make a difference in real people's lives. And it's been a great, I just couldn't ask for more in a job, for sure.
That's fantastic, Peggy. You've worked with the city, so you worked at the municipal level, you worked at the state and federal, so you've experienced it all, and in doing so, you figured what you really want and what you don't want. So I think that was fantastic. Now, you've also worked in a variety of non-governmental organizations, nonprofit organizations. We have students here in the program. We now have rebranded our program as public and nonprofit, so a lot of students are interested. They want to work in DC, or they want to work in a nonprofit or advocacy arena. What advice would you have for students like them?
Yeah, so when I came here, like I said, I didn't have a job, and the first thing everyone tells you is that you need to walk your resume around the hill. So I did that, walked around, trying to figure out if being on Capitol Hill was for me, and I made a decision that it wasn't. And so I'm also one of those people that didn't work on the Hill. I moved here, I was in my late 20s. I needed to, pay for my own things, and it's still a challenge on the Hill to get paid a salary where you can afford to live in DC and eat at the same time. And I came from that's also a lot of my story. Like, I came from a family where I had to, actually make money. The other thing about the Hill that's important for people of color is that it's a very segregated place. I mean, even today, it's still there's still not a lot of people of color that work on the Hill, and it's better. But oftentimes that's in the offices that are led that have members that are people of color as well. So almost 25 years ago, that was there weren't that many of them either. So I made a choice that working on the Hill wasn't for me, and that I needed to work outside the Hill. So I very quickly, I think when one member of Congress asked me if I wanted to volunteer in his office, I was like, yeah, well, then how am I supposed to eat? I don't understand how that's supposed to happen. So over the course of these years, I worked at the National Alliance, I worked at the Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs, which was a membership organization of maternal and child health directors at the state level. I worked for the National Alliance to End Homelessness, which was not a membership organization, but very mission driven, obviously, to end homelessness. And the difference between those two organizations, I think, says a lot about the difference in DC. And I haven't had experience working in the private sector or in the, while I have been a lobbyist at times, I'm not a lobbyist like a K Street lawyer lobbyist. I don't have that experience. I've worked with some of them though. But the biggest difference between the Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs and the National Alliance in Homelessness was working for a nonprofit membership organization. It was great in some ways because we had connection to the field. Like I said, DC is not connected to people necessarily, so you have to work really hard to know what's happening out in the real world, because you need to remember that policy needs to be informed by the practice out on the field. So out in the field. So a membership organization was great for that. But membership organizations are also driven by members, and if they're resistant to change, it can direct the overall national organization in a way that's not conducive to maybe your personal priorities or the vision that you have for the work that you're carrying. The other challenge at the time was that association received federal dollars, and for maternal and child health, reproductive health is a piece of that. And when Congress in the early 2000s, when Congress changed from Democrat to Republican, there were some threats on the association's funding because of reproductive health training, as an example. Whereas at the National Alliance in Homelessness and every job I had until I came to the federal government, they did not receive federal dollars, so we didn't have that to worry about that strain. And they were not a mission; they were not a membership organization. So the alliance could direct their own policy, but they also didn't have that always have the connection to the field. So it was something to kind of balance and kind of think about along the way. And that is, trying to understanding that there's a variety of organizations here in DC. And if being in DC is of interest to you, it's okay to try out different ones to see what's the right fit. Are you a researcher and would prefer to look at the data and be a data analyst and work at an organization like where I worked at the. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. It's just the app closed.
It's just the internet, and everybody's so dependent on nowadays. So we totally understand. Glad you're able to join us back. So you were telling when you kind of last cut off, you were telling us about, we need to figure out what's your strength, right? What you're interested in,
right.
Whether it's a data analyst, and that's when I think we lost you.
Right, and so when I worked at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which was a policy think tank, that was a great place for people who wanted to crunch numbers and make sure that, policy was grounded in research. As I said, at the National Alliance to End Homelessness, that was a great place for social workers who decided maybe social work itself isn't right for me, but I want to be in policy. And so I want to bring my experience of trying to help people get assistance to the real world. There's a place in DC for everyone, but you have to find it, and that's but it's here for sure.
Okay, fantastic. That's good to know, because often, you think of DC and you just think about the Hill and you don't think about all these other opportunities that exist. So thank you for mentioning that. I'll again like to say, feel free to post your questions in the chat, and then I'll be happy to ask it on your behalf. So you've been front and center with the current administration, really working on issues of housing, affordability, homelessness, and the federal government has provided the pandemic relief. They've been funding a lot of money to address this issue of housing affordability, homelessness. Do you think that this will help with all of the systemic issues we've been faced with?
I think that's what we're called to do, and that's why I came in to work for the administration. It would be a shame if the billions of dollars that Congress has allocated in the various relief packages since early 2020, if all we did was address the current crisis and didn't recognize, like in the homelessness space in particular, that there was an eviction crisis before the pandemic. There was an affordable housing crisis before the pandemic. There was homelessness before the pandemic. So, and the pandemic has just shined a light on the importance of housing and put more stress on families to maintain their housing. So let's use these billions of resources to help families get whole, but also reform our systems so that we're better able to address families' needs in the future. And that is of top of mind for all of us as we're making decisions. I think the other piece that we can take from this is we've had to be very flexible during the pandemic. And with that flexibility comes great responsibility for us at the federal level, but also for all of the people at the local level who are trying to implement these new resources. So we'll be able to learn a lot about how maybe we can make existing programs better because of the flexibility and still being able to move these things forward.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for that. And you know, President Biden has also shown that he thinks housing is an infrastructure issue and should be included in the infrastructure proposal, which is ongoing now. What's been like to work on kind of developing and advancing a proposal that includes housing as part of infrastructure now?
Well, I mean, it is kind of crazy when the White House, when you're talking to the White House every day. And so even though I took this job as an appointee, and I know that my job is to talk to the White House, so to be able to, be behind the scenes, working on policy and bringing the 20 years of experience and even longer than that, knowing, even though it's been a while since I worked in the city level, I still am in touch with my former colleagues at the city, understanding how things work in a medium-sized, smaller city, are things that I can use to inform things like the American Jobs Package. So it's been great. And the thing that I keep front of mind are two things, actually, I would say, is I routinely recite to myself, be the change that you want to see in the world. Right? Like own where you're at and be the change that you want to see in the world. And two, you can't get what you don't ask for. So through those conversations with the White House before before the administration made that plan public, it's like, say all the things and don't be afraid of people telling you no, because like I said, you can't get what you don't ask for. And then to see your ideas come out of the president's mouth is so rewarding, and I often think back to like sitting in class in graduate school, fretting over a memo that I had to write, and then today to be writing memos for the Secretary of HUD has been great. But it's been fun to be able to take a career of learning and kind of pour it into a big proposal like that. It's very rewarding.
Fantastic. We have a question in the chat. Can you talk about the pandemic and how it has exacerbated housing challenges, especially for low-income people of color?
Yeah, and so, what we've seen from the pandemic, like I said, are that the problems that existed before have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And that includes the disproportionate impacts to communities of color, both from a health perspective and a housing instability perspective, right? We know that within the homelessness system, about 40% of people experiencing homelessness are Black alone. Not to mention that every race and ethnicity is overrepresented in the homelessness system except for white people. So what we're learning is then how to take these billions of dollars of resources and direct them to those communities. So rather than just spreading everything evenly and hoping it catches and then ended up getting the same results of inequity, how do we take these resources and target them to the communities that need it the most? And that's what we've been really focused on, and doing it in a way not to harm other communities, but to just rebalance where the need is. So for example, in the American Recovery Package that passed in March or April, March, So anytime there's a large amount of money that goes to states, there's always a state minimum, right, to protect the New England states, the smaller states, and make sure that they're getting their fair share. But that can be that can create an imbalance because they could get a good amount of resources for the need, and a lot of those states are heavily white and not people of color. So it creates this imbalance. So what we did is we left the state minimum because we want to make sure those states are taken care of, but we carved out a little section and to go to high need states. And at HUD, we were the ones in the housing side that did the calculations to show where those high need resources should be directed and which states will need more money, like Texas, in order to address the need and people and by people of color and by renters in that state. And we were really proud of that work. Even though it's a little, of the 20 or so billion dollars, it's about $2 billion of it. It still is helping to right that ship to direct resources to the people who need it the most.
No, I love what you said, because that clearly differentiates between equality and equity, right? Because, you can't just give all resources equally to all states, because you clearly identified their states that need it more. And so that's fantastic. I had a student who couldn't be here. She had a conflict with another appointment, but she did send in some questions, and I'll ask one of them here. And Van said that housing prices have increased significantly in the last few years. Fewer people can own a home. So what plan does the government have to solve the housing crisis?
Great. So home ownership side, my colleague Elena McCargo is the senior advisor on home ownership, but there are things. This is a high priority for the secretary, and so what we're looking at is how to help first-time homeowners in particular get down payment assistance. One of the things that's, that right now the majority of down payment assistance is through the tax code, which means that people still have to have the money to buy a house up front and then benefit when they file their taxes, be able to then benefit when they file their taxes at the end of the year. Well, that doesn't help a lot of people who haven't built up the wealth needed or the savings needed to buy a home. So how can we, so that's something that we're trying to figure out, right? How can you construct down payment assistance so that families get it on the front end when they need it the most to help pay for to be able to help create their entry into home ownership. So that's one of the things that we're doing on my side of the house. On the renter side of the house, we're having a conversation about how to help make federal rental assistance programs, how to help families save money. Right now, a family's contribution to their rent increases automatically as their income increases, which means, for those of us who don't have assistance, we get to save that money or decide how to use that money. But for families with assistance, their rent portion automatically goes up. So maybe there's a way to help adjust that so that, and there's one program called the Family Self-Sufficiency Program that does help families save that portion, the portion of that their rent cost would increase. It goes into a savings account. But with that program, families there's a lot of hurdles that families sometimes have to jump to do that. Well, could we take away some of those hurdles, help families save money, and then build that savings, which could then build into home ownership as well?
Thank you. Speaking about the rental assistance and on the rental side that you take care of, one other question that came up was the eviction moratorium. It really hurts small landlords, individual investors. So the student also wanted to know, what did the government or what can governments do to assist these smaller landlords?
So, when the eviction moratorium was created, we knew that this was going to be a problem, and we knew that it was a Band-Aid approach. It was just trying to put a Band-Aid on a wound that we knew was going to need more. And so what's happened is there's emergency rental assistance resources, which are to the tune of about over $45 billion that actually is moving through Treasury. And state and localities are standing up new programs. This is actually a great way to go get some experiences, to go to Richardson or Plano or Dallas, because they're probably looking for intern help or hiring in order to stand up these new emergency rental assistance programs. That they're and that way people can then pay their back rent to make these small landlords whole. The key piece is the landlords accepting the resources. Sometimes there's stigma that comes with accepting federal resources, and we need to make sure that landlords understand, look, we know that you need to be made whole. Here are the resources to do that. Please accept your tenant using these resources as payment for their back rent, and it can be used for future rent as well, as long as the tenant can show that their decrease in income was related at all to the pandemic.
I'm thinking there's so many programs, so many billions of dollars allocated by the government. If somebody wants to know about these programs and resources that are out there, is there a central website that somebody could go to?
Oh, there is actually, for the Treasury Department. So everything, in DC is silos, but for this big amount of money from the Treasury Department, if you Google, I can try to look at it and put it in the chat. But you can Google Treasury Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And Treasury has a website, and on that website it lists all of the grantees for their dollars. So then you have to contact who received Treasury's resources and locally to know where they're being distributed at.
Fantastic. I'd just like to remind the audience members, please share your questions in the chat. I have two more here that I'll ask Ms. Bailey. So one of the questions is, 1 in 5 transgender people in the United States has been discriminated when seeking a home, and more than 1 in 10 have been evicted from their homes because of their gender identity. Can you please address the challenge of homelessness that in fact is quite prevalent among transgender individuals?
Yes, so especially transgendered individuals who are youth or young adults is really a challenge. Is really something that needs to be addressed. And at HUD, we made a significant step in doing this by reversing or stopping a proposed regulation that was started in the previous administration that would have prevented transgendered people from being able to, or would have allowed homeless programs to discriminate against people who are transgendered, and we've put a halt on that to make sure that, and then also helped our homeless TA providers who help provide technical assistance out into the field, help providers build the skills and necessary to serve that population and the entire LGBTQ population. For homeless youth, it's enormous, the number of people that report time homeless, and contribute that to their families and their LGBTQ status. And it's just a priority for the administration that not be the case.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I have another question that relates to nonprofits and homelessness. So, what do you think is the role of nonprofits in addressing the challenge of homelessness? Essentially, I think they're asking what collaborative efforts are being done between, say, the nonprofits and governments to address this pandemic, is what the member calls it, of homelessness.
Right. So we can't end homelessness without the help of nonprofits, and the way the partnership works in the homelessness space actually is really unique for the federal government. A while back, HUD realized that we in DC, again, are too separated from the real world to be able to decide which local programs deserve money and which ones don't. And so created what's called the continuum of care. So in each city, and if in rural places, it's the state. So the state of Texas receives a grant from HUD. So what's the continuums of care then are the ones that apply to us. So locally, whatever organization is considered the continuum of care organizes all the homeless services providers locally. They set priorities. They decide which program should get money. They even coordinate locally on the intake system for people experiencing homelessness, and then tell HUD, okay, here's our local application. These are the priorities we've set locally. This is how much funding we're seeking, and then we look at those applications, score them accordingly, and give those resources to the continuum of care, who then disperses it out. And as I said, in a lot of the state, and particularly in Texas, rural areas are administered at the state level, and in Texas, they contract out with an organization that kind of helps make sure that in the rural areas people get those resources. So nonprofits are essential to that work, both faith-based and non-faith-based nonprofits play a huge role in addressing homelessness. Everything from a soup kitchen to providing housing itself for people.
Sure, no, definitely. And I know that we have a lot of students interested who are currently working for nonprofits, want to start a nonprofit, or work for a nonprofit. So this was helpful. Peggy, I know you're very involved with the Americans Jobs Plan as well. Can you talk a little bit about that role that you are doing and how homelessness fits into it?
Sure. So, so I get to work on that a lot and help advise the secretary on those components. And you may know, if you're following, that Secretary Fudge is one of the cabinet members that have been placed as a part of the mini cabinet that's working on the jobs plan. And it's really rewarding, and it's recognizing that sure, we can give people assistance, but there's a supply problem as well. And so we need to build and create more affordable housing units for renters. And that's what the jobs plan does. It brings resources. What a lot of people don't know is that the main source of affordable housing funding is actually at Treasury with the low-income housing tax credit. That's how affordable housing apartment buildings get built. But though the mandate on that program only doesn't make housing deeply affordable for people with little to no income. So if you think about the people who need public housing, the low-income housing tax credit by itself isn't enough for them. So what happens is there are HUD programs, the Housing Trust Fund, a program called HOME, that's not an acronym exactly, it's the HOME program, and then project-based assistance. So just like basically like kind of like grant resources to affordable housing developers. Those programs get coupled with the low-income housing tax credit, and to make it even more affordable to build the building, so that then they can charge less in rent. It's really what I say almost every day is what we need to do through the jobs plan is make this a lot easier. Because then we would have a lot more affordable housing, and that's what we're hoping to do. Is these programs were all created in silos and at different times, and not meant to work together. But they do work together, and so we've got the main work of the jobs package is to put more money into them, and then use the legislation to streamline them so that it works better for developers and eventually the people that live in the buildings. And so that's how that will help with homelessness, because we'll have more units to be able to put people in.
Great. These are fantastic questions. Keep them coming. Post them in the chat. I have one more here. You've already talked about, but the student or the person asks, what are some ongoing efforts by the current administration to tackle homelessness, which you've been talking about? So if you want to add something to that, feel free to. But the second half is, why do you think these efforts are different from what's been done in the past?
So yeah, well, right. So with the American Jobs Package, the American Rescue Plan, and resources that went out last year are all driven to help people experiencing homelessness. And the thing that we're kind of doing that's different than the past is thinking about all of the resources. as a continuum, as a system, and trying to make it take what we've learned from the last 30, 40 years of in the homelessness space and bringing that to these new resources. So, making it easier for people to apply for resources, allowing for some self-certification to so people can self-attest to their need and self-attest to their why they've lost their income, things like that, that just make it easier for people to get assistance, not assuming, understanding that people who need help, and we should give it to them and make it as easy as possible. That's the, because that is what creates a lot of barriers. If people don't have their social security card, don't have their birth certificate, that shouldn't keep them from being able to get assistance, given how long it can take to replace those things. And then I forgot the second part of the question.
Oh, the second part was, let me go back to the question here and get it right here. Why do you think these efforts are different from what has been done in the past?
Oh, okay. So I got both parts.
You did. You did. And you're building on is what you said, it's learning from everything that's happened in that space in the last several decades, and then you're building on it, which that's how policy works, right?
Right. Well, how it should work, right? That's the thing, is like a commitment. Even I keep talking about the Department of Treasury. That's another thing. Like we could let the Department of Treasury administer their program the way they always, however they want. But they and us have decided, we need to do everything we can to break the silos at the federal level so that at the local level, things are as streamlined as possible. And yes, that takes extra work, but it's funny because of my whole work experience outside of the federal government. Now I need to hold myself accountable to the things that I would have told me if I was still on the outside of the federal government. And that's what we're all trying to do.
Sure, that's fantastic. I was at a conference one time and I was hearing to the speaker, and he rightly said, your zip code where you live in defines the rest of your life. How is there truth to this statement? What are your thoughts to that?
Unfortunately, it is true. A lot of your life outcomes as an adult are almost predetermined by the zip code in which you live in. And in my career, a lot of my work, as I said, I started out in DC. My second job in DC was with the Association Maternal and Child Health Program. So I worked on Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program policy, and then went to the National Alliance on Homelessness and brought together kind of that housing and homelessness work. And I worked at that intersection of housing and healthcare for a long time, until just recently, where I started to work more on the housing side. And so and so that has driven a lot of my career, that idea that your zip code address, and so that's what we need to fix. It's going to take not only helping people access other community, the communities of their choice, and trying and restricting racist and discriminatory practices that happen in communities that result in keeping people of color, people with low incomes out, but it also means investing in communities. And you can see this around Dallas, right? The places where that are red and green. I grew up in Cedar Hill, very green, great place, but you don't have to go more than 3 miles up the road into South Dallas to find places that are where the life expectancy is a decade or more worse than in Cedar Hill or Plano or Frisco.
True, and that's something I think we all need to be working towards clearly. And there was a report yesterday that the pandemic has further reduced the life expectancy to 2 years in the United States. So all of these factors, I'm sure, will be ongoing that we work on, pandemic or not. But of course, pandemic has made certain things worse. Go ahead, Peggy.
No, I was just going to say, and it goes back to the point I made earlier, right, about how we really need to use these crisis resources to correct for that. And I think we can. I think there are enough resources, and then if we get a few more through other legislative actions through the rest of this year, we can really make generational change that is very exciting.
Very true, very true. If there are other questions, please feel free to post it in the chat. And while I wait on those questions, I thought I'll ask you a little bit more personal question. What do you most enjoy about your work?
So the fact that I can actually tangibly see that what we're doing can make a difference, right? So that being involved today, today the Centers for Disease Control announced that they're extending the eviction moratorium for another 30 days. And this was going to be probably the last extension, but we've worked really hard to help alongside the CDC to help advise them on the public health risk of eviction and which communities face eviction the most, and to have the CDC take our advice and protect people during the pandemic. And so to know that there are people that'll be able to stay in their home for that are safe for now until we can get them rental assistance is really rewarding. And so to just know that we're right now protecting people, if nothing else, from the bad outcomes that could come from housing instability, that is truly rewarding to sit in this seat and humble and really humbling to have this opportunity.
That's fantastic. And you knew this was coming. I'm going to ask you the opposite side of it. What you enjoy the least in your work?
So, well, luckily, I don't know how many of you have followed Secretary Fudge, but luckily I have a boss where I don't have to mince my words very often because Secretary Fudge encourages us to say what we have to say. But so that's not it, but it's definitely, the federal government is a bureaucracy, to say the least. And so it can feel like a lot to make sure that there are certain words I've learned actually in a different way, like equities. So that you have to make sure that everyone who has equities into whatever your decision you're making has line of sight into it, has reviewed it maybe 2 or 3 times, and has gotten back to you. And everybody's feedback is valuable, so we have to take it. So I have a new appreciation for understanding why it takes the federal government sometimes so long to do things, for sure. And a commitment to myself to not be that bottleneck person.
We're coming towards the end of the hour, but any final, I see there's one more question in the chat, so I want to ask that. What's a dream policy that you'd like to see implemented? That's a good question.
Well, that's a great question. And it's actually what convinced me to come in to work for the administration and to become a federal employee, because President Biden is the first president to say that universal voucher assistance is a priority of his. And that would be a dream, to be able to because right now, what people may not know is that right now, only 1 in 4 families that are eligible for federal rental assistance receive it, because federal rental assistance is not an entitlement. It is appropriated each year in Congress, and there's only enough money to serve 25% of the people who are of the people that are eligible. So my dream policy would be to have enough funding in the voucher program so that everybody who needs assistance can get it, and that would make housing affordable to where people would, 11 million people right now pay more than 50% of their income on rent. And I think there are just so many, it's just so hard to pay for the other things that you need if that much of your income is going to rent. I think Matthew Desmond in the book Evicted says that the rent eats first. And that's one of the things that we found through the pandemic, that, and a challenge actually, because some families, rather than accruing rental debt, have used credit cards in particular, or short-term loans or things like that to pay the rent. And if we just had a universal housing benefit, people we would be in so much better place and people would be safe.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I hope that dream policy of yours gets implemented, and I know the current administration is working on it, so that's fantastic. There's another question in the chat, and it's from Rodney. Rodney, you may want to expand on it, but how do we address the problem of fixing homelessness but not in my neighborhood?
Oh, with the not in my backyard kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
that
yeah.
balance. Yeah.
Right.
And so, well, one of the, first of all, we need to do some myth busting about what it means to have affordable housing in your community. We can't complain about home values being decreased and the price of housing going up. And we also have to show that, affordable housing helps communities. It doesn't hurt communities. So there's that. So there's some myth busting in the not in my backyard piece. There's also making sure that we're investing in the services and supports that people need. So people, there are a segment of people experiencing homelessness who need some wraparound mental health services or other case management services to help them stay housed. And if we invest in that, particularly in what's called supportive housing, we've shown that we can not only help the person stay housed when sometimes that person had been on the streets for 20, 30 years, but by having supportive housing, we can help turn neighborhoods around as well. So that's what we need to do, is help do some myth busting on homelessness and what it means to house people, while also pushing for investment in the things that it takes to keep people stably housed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rodney, for your question. Any final advice or thoughts for our students who are looking to work in the government job, specifically federal?
Yeah, so the one thing that I would say is, and that I always try to make sure to say to students is, most of us have careers that are a marathon and not a sprint, and so know that. And I'm, like I said, I most definitely did not see myself as a federal employee. I don't know if you've tried to fill out the USA Jobs application, but even when I had no job, I struggled with trying to make it through that application. So I never thought that I would be a federal employee. I just each day woke up knowing that I had paid a lot of money to go to school, so I wanted to be happy. And for me, mission-driven work was the way that was going to make me happy. And so, just looking for the opportunities to make a difference, to find a niche that speaks to you and is the thing that makes you passionate to do your work. But knowing that a career isn't linear and that you can have a life and you can live your life and do other things besides work and still achieve goals you didn't even know that you had, which is definitely the case for me.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Speaking of, I have another question in the chat which asks, do you think being a member of a fraternity or sorority helps one get their foot in the door in regards to employment in public policy environment?
So, I think any networking opportunity is important. I did not pledge at Notre Dame. Actually, we don't have fraternities, or they didn't have fraternities and sororities, so I didn't have that piece. But what I found is that that sort of connection helped with my first job. So, like I said, when I went to work for the city of Rockwall, that job was a UTD grad. They wanted they were hoping to get a UTD grad, and I applied, and I was able, so that did help me get that first position. But when I came to DC, I didn't know anyone and was able to get a job. And I haven't used my college networks here. I'm just making sure that is true to get a job. Once you get your first job, it's about the quality of work that you did and the friends that you made through that work. So that would be my advice, is that definitely can help. Any networking opportunity can help, especially, like I said, with that first job. After that, it's about building the body of work that people grow to respect, and networking through your job that is important for those next opportunities.
Fantastic. I think all great advice that you've given, Peggy. I love the fact that you said be the change you want to see in this world, and you live by that mantra, and you also live by, if you don't ask, you don't get. So those are very good things that I leave the students with. I don't see any additional questions in the chat, and so I really want to thank you for your time, Peggy. You've shared some very valuable information with us on what's going on in the housing world, the housing policies, America's job plan, and you've also given very excellent tips to our students who are going to hopefully want to go work in the government, federal government specifically. So we want to thank everybody who's here, who's attended this session. We wish you all good luck. Stay safe. Have a wonderful rest of the summer. And thank you, Ms. Bailey, for this wonderful webinar.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. This was great.
Fantastic. See you all later. Bye-bye.